we've got a deal. Will you look at that? The negotiations with Iran apparently were fruitful. Now, look, this is the penultimate deal. The final deal is going to be on June 30th, but this is incredibly specific and shockingly good for the Western partners here. It's not just the U.S., but Russia, France, and the others as well that were negotiating with Iran. We appear to have a fairly terrific deal. So first of all, President Obama is going to talk about it.
Today, after many months of tough, principled diplomacy, we have achieved the framework for that deal. And it is a good deal, a deal that meets our core objectives. This framework would cut off every pathway that Iran could take to develop a nuclear weapon. Iran will face strict limitations on its program, and Iran has also agreed to the most robust and intrusive inspections and transparency regime ever negotiated for any nuclear program in history. So this deal is not based on trust. It's based on unprecedented verification.
Now, I'm going to go into the annoying details of the deal. Isn't that something to look forward to? You know why? Because I want you to know what's actually in the deal. So I'm not going to go over every point, but I'm going to go over enough so you understand exactly what's in it. So here's the details. On the enrichment of uranium by the Iranians, here's what the agreement says. Iran has agreed to reduce by approximately 2/3 its installed centrifuges. Iran will go from having about 19,000 installed today to 6,104 installed under the deal, with only 5,060 of these enriching uranium for 10 years. All 6,104 centrifuges will be IR-1s, Iran's first-generation centrifuge. Let's stop there after that first bullet point. So I'll break down what that means. We were hoping to get them down from about 19,000 to 6,500 centrifuges. It turns out we did a little bit better in negotiations than even we suspected. 6,100 is what they'll go down to. So they have gotten rid of the great majority of what they were doing. Now, on top of that, what remains is not the latest generation, but the first generation, the oldest stuff they have for enriching uranium, which would mean that if they were to stop listening to the inspectors and go off on their own to try to build a weapon, it would take much longer. Good news. Second bullet point. Iran has agreed not to enrich uranium over 3.67% for at least 15 years. Now, let me stop there because that's super important. Okay, you know how much you need to enrich uranium to get a weapon, a nuclear weapon? 90%. They could only enrich it to a little over 3%. It's a big difference between 3% and 90%. So this is fantastic, and they will not be going over 3.67% for at least 15 years. Now, I'll talk about enforcement a little bit later on. Iran has agreed to reduce its current stockpile of about 10,000 kilograms of low-enriched uranium to 300 kilograms of 3.67% LEU for 15 years. So another wonderful piece of news. We've gotten rid of 97% of their enriched uranium. They were at 10,000 kilograms, now they're going to be down to 300. What do critics want? Us to get rid of 98%? 99%? This is an excellent deal for the U.S. and its partners. Continuing. All excess centrifuges and enrichment infrastructure will be placed in IAEA monitor storage and will be used only as replacements for operating centrifuges and equipment. Iran has agreed not to build any new facilities for the purpose of enriching uranium for 15 years. Iran's breakout timeline, the time that it would take for Iran to acquire enough fissile material for one weapon, is currently assessed to be 2 to 3 months. That timeline will be extended to at least 1 year for a duration of at least 10 years under this framework. So, if we had not reached any kind of deal, right now, Iran, if they said, all right, screw you guys, we're not doing the inspections anymore, and they went for it and tried to get a nuclear weapon, we think they might be able to get one in 2 to 3 months. Now, they're not headed in that direction. They weren't headed in that direction in the first place. We already have inspectors there. We know that, right? But if they wanted to, they can get there in about 2 to 3 months. Now, according to this deal, because of how much they're giving up, another year will be added to that timeline if they wanted to break the agreement, okay? So the agreement is they're not going to do any of this stuff for 10 to 15 years, and then you would renegotiate, right? But even if they broke the agreement, we'd be in much better shape than before the agreement. So again, fantastic. Inspections and transparency. So here's what they say about that. The IAEA will have regular access to all of Iran's nuclear facilities, including to Iran's enrichment facility at Natanz and its former enrichment facility at Fordo, and including the use of the most up-to-date modern monitoring technologies. Inspectors will have access to the supply chain that supports Iran's nuclear program. The new transparency and inspections mechanisms will closely monitor materials and/or components to prevent diversion to a secret program. Not only are they inspecting every facility that Iran has, they're also going down the supply chain and saying, oh, if you got a facility that could actually make supplies for the facility that we're inspecting, we're going to inspect that one as well. As thorough as you could want. More inspections. Inspectors will have access to uranium mines and continuous surveillance at uranium mills, where Iran produces yellowcake for 25 years, so they'll have access for 25 years. Inspectors will have continuous surveillance of Iran's centrifuge rotors and bellows production and storage facilities for 20 years. Iran's centrifuge manufacturing base will be frozen and under continuous surveillance. All centrifuges and enrichment infrastructure removed from Fordo and Natanz will be placed under continuous monitoring by the IAEA. That's, of course, an international group that inspects nuclear facilities for exactly this kind of purpose. So now on the reactors and the reprocessing, look, every piece of this so far is good to great news. The original core of the reactor, which would have enabled the production of significant quantities of weapons-grade plutonium, will be destroyed or removed from the country. Iran will ship all of its spent fuel from the reactor out of the country for the reactor's lifetime. Iran is committed indefinitely to not conduct reprocessing research and development on spent nuclear fuel. So on these issues, including on plutonium, it's wiped off the map. On uranium, they keep some centrifuges, the oldest ones, as I explained, a small percentage, right? On plutonium, they get rid of everything. They won't even do research on it anymore. This deal is so good that I'm afraid the Iranians are going to look at it and go, what are we doing? We're going to agree to this finally on June 30th? Why did we agree to something where we give up 97%? By the way, what are we giving up? The United States and the others? We're just lifting the sanctions that we put on them earlier. So pretty much nothing. I mean, yeah, good. You're lifting sanctions, and I'm glad that we got that as leverage, and it was well played by the Obama administration. Instead of bombing them, they put significant sanctions on them and got other countries, including Europe, to put significant sanctions on them. And so just for the price of lifting sanctions we didn't have before, we wound up getting all these concessions. It's nearly impossible to say that that's not a great deal. I got just one last section for you guys. Sanctions say Iran will receive sanctions relief if it verifiably abides by its commitments. Furthermore, U.S. and EU nuclear-related sanctions will be suspended after the IAEA has verified that Iran has taken all of its key nuclear-related steps. If at any time Iran fails to fulfill its commitments, these sanctions will snap back into place. U.S. sanctions on Iran for terrorism, human rights abuses, and ballistic missiles will remain in place under the deal. So any other sanctions not related to the nuclear issue will stay in place, and if they violate the deal anyway, all the sanctions come back. Now, look, that's going to be a little bit harder to do for our partners in the European Union and those at the UN. They'd have to re-vote on all of that, and that process would take a while. For us, we can reinstitute our sanctions immediately. So Iran gets that in return. But overall, I'm not the only one who thinks this. A lot of the allies who were working on this deal came out going, that was pretty good. Here is the British Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond. He said, this is well beyond what many of us thought possible even 18 months ago, and a good basis for what I believe could be a very good deal. So, yet another situation where President Obama's foreign policy seems to have worked. It looks like if this deal gets finalized on June 30th, we will have stopped Iran's nuclear program. They will not be developing weapons. We will have taken away 97% of their stockpile. And in return, we'll lift the sanctions we put on them in the first place. That's as close to mission accomplished as it gets.